we want to thank our sponsors very quickly for this. We had a little extra help for this. So Capital Financial, the Reserve at Mills Farm, Eastside, and Aware Senior Care. We appreciate those companies and their support for doing this. In case you need to leave and go take some shelter or something for bad weather, as long as Melanie doesn't need to do that, we will continue to record her and we will send you the recording. So please be safe. And we want to thank all of you and thank Melanie for being with us again today. Melanie is a nurse trainer who has many years of dementia experience. And we just thank her so much for being with us today. We're going to talk about medications, and there's probably way more information than we can fit in an hour. But Melanie, I know you're an expert at that. So if people have questions, I know they can write them in the chat. And Melanie, I'll just turn it over to you.
Thanks, Lisa. Medications is one of really my favorite things to talk about because of so many of the things about living with dementia, about brains. Medications are one of the things that are really misunderstood. And they're either misunderstood in a way that they're terrible, they're bad medications, it's evil to use medications, or they're thought about in a way of, oh, give me more, fix it with the meds. And the reality is neither of those attitudes are really helpful because medications are not the answer for dementia, the way they currently stand. Medications aren't the answer, but the reality is medications can be part of the answer. So they're not going to currently, as what we have available right now, they are not the answer, but they can absolutely be part of the answer for some really specific things. The problem is we expect medications to either do too much or to not be helpful at all. So we're going to talk about when medications can be helpful, how they can be helpful, and what kinds of things they can't do. So if you kind of look at medications and you go, really good at this, they've got this, and you look at medications, you go, not working for that. That's not something medications can do. That's what we're going to be kind of talking about. So I'm going to say this at the beginning, and I'm hoping that Lisa will remind me to say this at the end, because my guess is we'll have some people kind of coming in and out, and some people joining us later. What I'm going to say is I can't give you your answers. I can give you generic information, and I can give you general things about medications and how they work and how they don't work. But the only way I would be able to give you really specific recommendations and answers is if I came to your place and I evaluated your person living with dementia and I read all their medical records and I did a physical exam, I knew their history, and we can't do that in an hour or really at all. So that's not what I'm able to do. I'm not able to say, do this, don't do this. I can give you two things. I can give you general information about medications, how they work, how they don't work. So I can do that. And the second thing I can do is I can help you figure out the questions to ask your healthcare provider. So the questions to ask your physician or your nurse practitioner or your PA. I can help you figure out what questions to ask your person about that. So let's go ahead and get started talking about medication. So I'm going to start by showing you a picture of the brain. And I'm pulling it up in the background to make sure I've got the right one up so I can bring it right up. I'm going to show you a picture of the brain. So if you look at, and that's kind of startling, it's kind of hard to look at this picture. So these are brains, and some of you may have seen these before in other things I've done, or there are all kinds of images out there. These are actually photographs of the brains of two men who died. So these are autopsy pictures. And when these two men died, they were the same gender, they were the same age, they were the same size to the point of having the same head circumference. So they were matched to line up like this. They were matched to line up like this. So when you look at those two brains, it's really clear that there's some differences between them. And this brain is bigger, it's brighter, and it's more filled out. And this brain is smaller, it's kind of not really, it's a darker color, and it's got these crevices, and it looks dried up and kind of shriveled up. So the reason I show this to you, this is the structural change in the brain. So is just to be really clear, there's not enough medication I can put in this brain to get this brain to be able to do the same amount of work that brain can do. So that's why I show you these pictures. There's not enough or different types or what I can do chemically to this brain to make this much tissue be able to do this much work. So I'm going to ask you to do something with me. I'm going to one thing I'm going to ask you is if you do have the ability to start your video, I'd love to see you and see your faces. And Emily, we know that you're a little blurry, and we know that's not because you're not, you're just, it's your camera and it's the way it is. But if the other folks can share their camera, I'd love to be able to see you if you're okay doing that, because I'd like you to do something with me. What I want you to do with me is put up 5 fingers on one hand and put up 3 fingers on the other hand. Now take these 5 fingers and these 3 fingers and try to line them up. Try to make them line up. So you might be able to line them up like this, or you might be able to line them up like that, or you might be able to line them up like that. But you can't really make those 3 fingers and those 5 fingers really fit together. And that's the challenge of dementia, is we want a brain that's got this much to be able to do this much. And medications can't do that. So when we're talking about what medications can do and can't do, the medications actually can work on the chemicals. So they can help what's over here connect, but they can't make it grow back, or they can't make it fill in. So medications can't do that kind of stuff. So that's where we're gonna start. And I am gonna encourage you, Lisa's gonna be watching the chat. I am gonna encourage you, if you have questions, to drop them in the chat, or well, I'm gonna leave some questions at the end, or some time for some questions at the end. But what medications do is they work on chemicals. So medications don't work on structure, but they work on chemicals. So if you look at these pictures, what you can see is this is the normal, healthy brain. This is someone with early Alzheimer's. This is somebody with late Alzheimer's, and this is an 18-month-old baby. So red is where the chemicals are working, the chemicals are acting. The purple is where the chemical, it's fluid, the chemicals aren't working. So let's talk about how those medications work on those chemicals. So the way the medications work is you have, normally in your brain, you've got brain cells, and they're kind of far, they're far apart. They don't actually touch. They're far apart. So you've got these brain cells, and here are my brain cells, and you've got these chemicals that move from one brain cell to the other brain cell and turn it on. So it's kind of like a relay. So the chemical turns on here, and goes down the relay. Well, the challenge is the brain cells themselves are farther apart, and there are not as many chemicals. So when the brain cells are farther apart and there's not as many chemicals, the chance of the message getting from this brain cell to this brain cell go way down. So the brain cells that are there often aren't getting messages. You know, there's a third piece. The chemicals that turn things on and off are the neurotransmitters. But here's the problem. my light over my head is on, and it's going to stay on until I turn it off. I can't turn it on again until I turn it off. So what's got to happen in our brain is once the brain cell is turned on, it's also got to be turned off so it can be turned back on. So there's the chemicals in the brain called enzymes. And what the enzymes do is they connect with those neurotransmitters and they take them out of circulation so those brain cells can turn off so they can be turned back on again. So that's what those enzymes do. But here's where it gets to, we talked about the brain cells, there are fewer of them. The neurotransmitters, there are fewer of them. Alzheimer's disease, Lewy body dementia, frontal temporal lobe dementia, vascular dementia, none of those dementias change the enzymes. So the enzymes are still out there taking the neurotransmitters out of circulation. They're still doing their jobs, and they're competing with the turning the brain cells on and off. So they're competing with the neurotransmitters. So what the medications do, the Alzheimer's medications, what those two groups of medications do is they act like decoys. So they're kind of shaped, they kind of are similar to the neurotransmitters. So what happens is those enzymes go and they attach themselves to those neurotransmitters and they take them out of circulation. Well, they're not very discriminating. So if there's something there that kind of looks like a neurotransmitter, that enzyme is going to go and grab it. So the medications act like decoys. So what happens is there is then more of the neurotransmitters to do the job of turning those brain cells on and off. So they're not actually more of them, they're just more of them available. They don't create the neurotransmitters, they don't reproduce them, they just put them out there in circulation so they can turn those brain cells on and off. So show me, and you can show me either by giving me a thumbs up using a reaction, or you can show me by putting your thumbs up. Did that kind of make sense, or is it really confusing? And why did I waste 3 minutes of your life talking about that? Okay, so that kind of made sense. So that's good to hear. So why that's important is the medications that we currently have available for Alzheimer's disease, for Lewy body dementia, the medications that we currently have available don't make the brain cells come back. They don't make more neurotransmitters. They just help those neurotransmitters that are there in circulation be able to connect and do their job. So what that means is the kinds of changes that we see when people start taking those Alzheimer's drugs, sometimes they're called the dementia drugs, what we might see are people's brains starting to connect a little bit better. Now, here's the problem. They don't always connect with the memory part. So if I take a medication for a cough, what I want is I want the cough to go away. So a lot of times when people think about taking a medication for dementia, what they really want to happen is the memories to come back. Because often when we think about dementia, we immediately go to, put your fingers right here, this part of the brain right here, way a little bit deep in there, that has to do with memory. So that's what we start thinking about, what we want to come back and do better. But if I go back and I share my screen again, oops, wrong way, wrong way, wrong way. And we look at this brain. So the memory, you can't really see it from the outside. The memory is kind of in here. But you notice that it's not just deep inside the brain that's changing, it's all over the brain. So we're having some changes up here in the part of the brain that has impulse control and insight into behavior, an ability to sequence and organize yourself. So we're having changes there to there. We're having changes back here in the vision. the part of the change that allows people to process all of these things that they see. There are changes back there. We're having changes in this part of the brain. And this is kind of those temporal lobes. It's really kind of down more in there, kind of down in there. But these temporal lobes that have to do with language, we're having changes there. And if you put your hands across the top of your head like this, we're having changes in this part of the brain, which is where sensory motor is. So that's ability to kind of do things. So when we think about dementia and we think about the changes inside in memory, the changes in frontal lobe, the changes in vision, the changes in language, the changes in ability to do stuff, the changes that happens when we've got more chemicals, is any of that might start to show more connection. So what we might see is not that the person so Lisa is my daughter and I've got dementia and she's my daughter. And it might not make me recognize Lisa as my daughter, realize that our relationship and how much we love each other, but it might help me say something like, well, hey, sweetheart, that one that you got,
Hmm.
that's nice.
Thank you.
So it gives me some language that I can use to connect with the person. So I had a lady tell me, she said, my mother, before she started taking these drugs, I would ask my mother every night, I would say, do you want do you want some ice cream? And what is the answer to do you want ice cream always? You can show me again with your reaction. What is all, oh, Dana gave double thumbs up. Sue's got her thumbs up. You can put the answer to do you want ice cream is almost always yes. So her mother would say, yeah. She started taking the medication. About a month later, she asked her mother, she said, Mom, do you want some ice cream? And her mom said, yeah, chocolate. And she kind of went, oh, that was cool. And she thought it was just a fluke. Dementia fluctuates. It was just a fluke. That's not real. Well, the next night she said to her mom, Mom, do you want ice cream? And her mom said, yeah, strawberry. And so her mom wasn't remembering with the hippocampus. Her mom had some improvement in these language pieces. So her mom was able to get some words out better. That's really important. If you put your hands right here, that sensory motor, that's sometimes one of the things that come back. So I had a lady with dementia that I started on one of these drugs when I was working as a nurse practitioner. And I started her because what she was doing is picking up stuff. She was walking around everywhere and picking up stuff and carrying everything around. And some of the stuff she was picking up wasn't her stuff. So people were getting really kind of frustrated with her because she was picking up other people's pocketbooks. No, don't do that. She was getting in a lot of trouble. It was keeping her. People were mad at her. The staff were mad at her. The families were mad at her. The people whose pocketbooks she took, everybody was mad at her. So I started her on one of these medications, and it kind of went on for a while. And I walked in one day to see her daughter, and her daughter was there visiting, and her daughter had tears running down her face and said, oh no, what have I done? Oh crap, that's not good. But her daughter said, look at my mom. And what she was doing is she was sitting there in her chair and she was crocheting. She said, my mom hasn't been able to crochet in a year. So it brought back some of this sensory motor ability. So if her mom is sitting there in the chair crocheting, what is her mom not up doing? Collecting and picking up people's pocketbooks. So her gave her mom something else to do. So sometimes the way we measure these drugs are unfair to them. So if I measure the benefit of the drug on memory, it's kind of unfair because that's not really what it does. It kind of does chemicals that might be anywhere. But we do know they do a lot of studies on these medications. One of the studies that they did on one of these medications, people were able to stay where they were living for a year longer than people who didn't take the medication. So that says that something is happening. Now, here's where it gets really confusing. If you take these medications, about, so you think about the change like this from, most of these were approved for Alzheimer's disease, at least initially. So with Alzheimer's disease specifically, you think about changes that kind of go like this. What happens when you take the medication is you're still going to start the medication here in the same time frame. You're still going to wind up here. So they don't make people live longer. They just make the path different. So instead of taking that straight line that somebody without medication might take, about a third of people who took the medication got a little bit better and then stayed and stayed and then got worse faster. So some people actually got a little bit better. About a third of people got a little bit better, stayed a little bit better, and then got worse faster. About a third of people didn't get better, not better meaning with memory, but better meaning with sensory motor skills, better meaning with some language, better meaning with some frontal lobe impulse control kind of things. A third of people stayed on their plateau longer. So they didn't change and then they got worse faster. And a third of people, no changes in their trajectory. So a third of people didn't have any change. That's not a good response. A third of people got better. That's kind of a really good response. And a third of people kind of stayed the same longer before they went on that plateau. And I think that's a good response as well. The challenge is we're trying to measure things over months moving into years. Now, when I take something for a cough, because I'm not sleeping and I'm coughing. It's not COVID, it's allergies. So I'm up all night coughing because pollen is out. I can't sleep. When do I want my cough medicine to work? Right this minute. I actually want it to start working an hour or two ago. I want it to work right now. The problem, one of the challenges with these medications is they don't start working like that. They take a while to see, and we're talking months to years. So we want things to change immediately, and that patience of waiting to see what's going to happen and when is it going to happen, it just gets really frustrating. It gets really hard to wait. We don't like to wait. We want to see something now. But the medications that we currently have are medications that we're just going to have to wait and see how it works when it works. Now, when I taught nursing students at UNC Chapel Hill, and when I taught nursing students at Clemson University, and when I taught nursing students at Duke University, I had some rules. And one of the rules that I had was you need to know about the medication before you give it. And the second rule I had is when you tell me about side effects or adverse reactions, you cannot ever tell me that any medicine causes nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, constipation, headache, or a rash. You know why? Every medicine I've ever read about causes nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, constipation, headache, and a rash. So those don't count. But with these medications, some of the adverse reactions we get do have to do with that stomach stuff. And it can be a queasy stomach or an upset stomach. So some of them can cause that. Some of them can cause some nightmares and some bad dreams, but we can work with most of those kind of adverse reactions or side effects. So one of the reasons why I think these medications tend to be fairly well tolerated by most older people is, who do you think they tested these medications on? Mostly older people, because most of the people who have dementia are older, and not all of them, definitely not all of them, but most of them are. So they tend to be well tested on older people with conditions that a lot of older people have. So older people tend to tolerate these medications. So the kinds of medications we're talking about are things, and I'm going to use the brand names, even though a lot of them are available in generics now, just because they're easier to say. Aricept or Donepezil, I can say that one. things like Exelon, things like Razidine. Those are the kinds of medications that we're talking about. We're also talking about the Memantine or Namenda. You know, those are the current medications that we have that are specifically designated, approved for use in people, specifically with Alzheimer's disease. Some of them are approved for Lewy body dementia. They really aren't approved for vascular dementia or frontal temporal lobe dementia. Sometimes we can try them for people with those other diagnoses, but we're really aware that we're trying something that's off label for that. So I'm going to pause myself for a minute and see if you have any questions specifically about these Alzheimer's kinds of medicines, or the dementia category of medicines. What questions do you have? Or yes, Mary Jane unmuted. What would you like to ask Mary Jane? Not
So
Mary Jane, somebody there.
it's Crystal.
Hi.
Hey, how you doing? So in reality, the medications that we do have on the market for dementia and Alzheimer's, really, they don't stop it. They just sort of slow it down, slow down the progress of it.
That's a good way of saying it. So they don't prolong life. They don't pause the dementia. So what's happening in the brain continues to happen in the brain.
Mhm.
It's just people maintain a higher level of function for longer. 2/3 of people are going to maintain a higher level of function for longer. So they can do more for themselves. They can be more involved in their lives for longer. But it doesn't make the person live longer. It doesn't stop the direction that we're going. So good question.
Thank you.
So what, any other questions about this part? Quiet time on Zoom feels so long. That was only about 3 seconds, but it felt like hours. She's not talking. She's not talking. Is she okay? So I'm going to share my screen. I'm just going to show you this information. I will be sending the PowerPoint to Lisa, and she will help you have access to this. So we talked about this. We've talked about this, and this will be in your handout. We've talked about this. The reason I pull this up sometimes is it helps me remember things. Some things like for any of these medications, we're going to increase the doses slowly. For any of these medications, we're going to really explore what kind of delivery system. So is it better if it's a tablet? Is it better if it's a patch? Is it better if it's something that dissolves? Because sometimes people have the stomach problems. If they use the patch, stomach problems go away. So what kind of thing, if I don't like to take pills or swallowing pills are hard for me, something that dissolves might go much better. If I don't like that I'm used to taking medication in tablet form, that might work well. The other thing I wanted to mention is a lot of times when older people or when people living with dementia go in the hospital, the first thing they do is stop all of their medication to see if the medication might be causing something. That is not a good thing to do with these medications, because what we think happens is people, when we stop the medication, when we stop these medications, they kind of drop down to where they would be if they hadn't taken them. And we may or may not be able to get that benefit back. So be really careful about starting and stopping them. So I wonder if there are no other questions. This is Amanda, kind of similar. So we're going to move on and start talking about some of the medications that treat symptoms, because even though they may not treat the underlying condition, the brain changes, they may not, I got you, Lee, they may not treat those underlying conditions or changes. They might treat some of the symptoms that are associated with dementia. So yes, Lee, what's your question or comment?
Wanted to ask about, you touched on this and you may be going to come back and talk more about it. You're talking about dissolvable medications or patch, etc.
Right.
I'm having a little trouble with giving my wife the pills. Is mostly what she's taking.
Mhm.
And some of them I'm wondering that like they're 24 hours and, twice a day kind of things.
Mhm.
What happens if you dissolve those before they take them? Is that good or a bad thing?
Yeah. So
Or
that
do you know?
Yeah, so that's a question that you really want to talk to your pharmacist or your primary care, your physician, your nurse practitioner, because some of those medications, if they're extended release and you dissolve them, they can hit your body all at one time, and it's not a good effort. Some of those medicines, if you dissolve them, they hit your body in the wrong place. So maybe they're not supposed to be dissolved in the stomach. Maybe they're supposed to be dissolved in the intestines. So some of those medications are different for that reason. Some of them, you can crush them up, you can dissolve them, you can put them in applesauce. It doesn't make any difference at all. So that's a really specific question to ask about a specific medication. The other thing that often can help is we tend to, when we take medications, we tend to take the medication and then drink the water. One of the things that really can help, a lot of people have really dry mouths. And so we take the medication before people eat. They haven't had anything to eat or drink. So a lot of times what I'll get people to do is drink before they take the medication and have another drink before and then their mucous membranes, their mouth is really nice and moist and things don't stick. So that can be one thing that can be really helpful. Sometimes people find that it's easier to take a tablet in food. So if I tend to use food that's got texture to it. So something like yogurt that's got fruit with pulp in it. So it's got a little bit of texture in it. If I use something that's really, really smooth, people feel that pill or that tablet and they spit it out. So something like something that's got a lot of texture to it, or something chunky applesauce is a really good one. So it's got, it's not just really smooth. Did you have another comment as well?
Yes, ma'am. What about if you could get the tablet in liquid form, if it's available?
Yeah, so liquids sometimes work really well. The challenge with putting things in liquid, so if you're going to drink the liquid, that's fine. If you're going to mix the liquid, so either if you're going to crush it and dissolve it in liquid, or take the little bit of liquid and put it in something else so it doesn't have a taste or a smell, use the tiniest bit of liquid that you can, because then you've only got to get that person to drink this much. If you dissolve a tablet in this much, now if the person doesn't drink the whole thing, they've missed part of the dose. So use the tiniest little bit. I see Dana put a thing in the chat. Great question. That they're only good for a year, 2 years, and are they continuing? And that's a great question. Drug companies are only allowed to proclaim what they can prove. So for these medications, when they were approved, they were only studied for 2, then 3 years. And so they could only say they're effective for 12 months or 24 months or 36 months. They could only say they work for that long because that's how long they can prove. There's really not been a lot of long-term studies. What I can, but they're not going to hurt you to take them longer. It's not like they are going to build up in your bloodstream and poison you if you take them over 36 months. What I tended to do is stop them when those parts of the brain that we talked about, the frontal lobe, the language skills, the sensory motor, when people weren't using any of those skills anymore is when I would stop the medication. So for example, if someone is still eating with the spoon and, with the spoon, I'm going to keep them on that medication. If someone is still able to have some conversation, I'm going to keep them on that medication. When the person is in the bed and they're not really swallowing very well, at that point, I have conversations about, does it still make sense to do these medications? But I'm having conversations about all kinds of medications at that point. So I'm talking about, should the person still be taking their calcium? Should they still be taking? So I'm having that conversation about lots of different kinds of conversations at that point. Mary Donnelly put in strawberry jam. Emily put in applesauce, better than yogurt. I think it depends on what the person likes, and something with a little bit of texture. So I've actually done really well with chunky applesauce. The strawberry jam has little pieces of fruit in it that can work really well as well. So good question. So I'm going to move back to,
And I have one more question.
yes, please.
Also, we got the medical part of, trying to slow down and treat the dementia. But also if, a resident has a normal routine, trying to keep the resident on a normal routine. So
Yeah.
it's not too much of thinking that they're more physically used to getting up, washing their face. So I guess if you take the medication and the routine and like sort of put it in the system, you have to think that would do.
Yeah, so if I understood you, yeah, medications are not the only thing. There's having a schedule that makes sense to the person. So having that routine that makes sense. It's having relationships with people. So you've got people who are on your side. It's also things like being able to be outside, doing things that bring joy to your life, being in a familiar place where things are predictable, make sense. Yes, all of those things are helpful as well.
Thank
So we're going to go back and talk about some of these other drugs that treat symptoms, and you'll have a lot more detail in the PowerPoint when Lisa sends it to you. I'm just going to kind of go very briefly over what the different types are and what they do, and then you'll have that PowerPoint with a lot of detail. So the antidepressants are medications that treat depression, and about 50%, 30 to 50% of people with dementia also have depression. So it's kind of wrong not to treat that for most people. Sometimes people with depression look really sad and withdrawn. Sometimes people with depression look really irritated and irritable. So matching up that medication that helps people be kind of satisfied and relaxed versus people who need to be kind of energized, and matching those side effects, those original kind of way the medications work um, with the type of depression makes a big difference. So the antidepressants are probably underused in people living with dementia. And there's a whole bunch of them. And the newer ones are much easier, newer meaning over the last 10, 20 years, are much better than the ones that were used when the antidepressants first came out. So if someone took antidepressants back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, didn't tolerate them very well, the newer antidepressants are so much better tolerated. The second group that's up there are the mood stabilizers, and those are medications. If you go and you look those up, you're going to think, I don't know what I'm talking about. Because if you look those medications up, it's going to be things that are used for seizures, or things that are used for nerve pain, or things that are used for bipolar disease, but they actually work like a thermostat in the brain to kind of help those neurotransmitters kind of come to a nice balance. So people who have real mood swings, and 1 minute they're fine and the next minute they're frustrated, they're fine and they're frustrated, those medications work really well for people who are having those challenges. Part of the problem is, again, it's not a cough medicine. It's not going to make those symptoms go right away. They take a while to and these do build up in the bloodstream. So you get enough of them in that you start to reset those brain chemicals. The third one that's up there, the antipsychotics. Now, antipsychotics are medications that we hear a lot about with dementia. And so those are the medications that are a lot of times are trying to use to treat some of the real challenging symptoms. So things like people who are really angry and trying to protect themselves during care. So those are the kinds of medications. People who maybe get really distressed when it's time for their shower. Those are the kind of medications that are often used for that. People who are restless and upset in the late afternoon or evening, those are often the medications that are used for that. What those medications should be used for. So this is really the best example of how to use them right, how to not use them. The best, when they're approved for, when it makes sense to use them, are for three things. They make sense to use for people who are having hallucinations that scare them. So if people are having hallucinations, I had a lady who saw gremlins with blood dripping down their fangs walking around her ceiling. Well, that's scary. You know, I don't want to see gremlins with blood dripping down their fangs walking around my ceiling. So we tried a bunch of things for her. We tried putting her in a different room to sleep. She still saw gremlins. We tried having her sit kind of in a recliner instead of lying all the way down. We had her kind of sleep in a recliner. She still saw gremlins. So in that situation, I gave her a little bit of this one of these medications, and the gremlins turned into elves. And the elves didn't have fangs or blood. And so we stopped there. So these are medications that work for hallucinations. They work for delusions, which are those false fixed beliefs. Delusions are, I think you're trying to poison me, or I think you're having an affair with the church organist. You know, those are delusions, those false fixed beliefs. Now, if you got to be real careful, because if you are taking that medication, crunching it up, putting it in applesauce, and now giving it to me, and I find it, you can see where I might think you are trying to be sneaky and poison. Be careful about that kind of stuff. So those false fixed beliefs, those medications work well for that. And the third thing they work for is unprovoked aggression or violence. So right out of the blue, nothing before, nothing after I push somebody or punch somebody. The problem is a lot of times when people get that high of distress, it's because we did something to them. So if I walk into um, Lisa's house and I try to take her clothes off and pour water on her, how do you think she's going to respond? Yeah, she doesn't like it. She's got two thumbs down, not even one thumbs down. She's got two thumbs down. She isn't gonna like that. She doesn't want that. That's wrong. It's not fair. So if she tries to protect herself, that is absolutely appropriate because she doesn't want some strange. So that's when we really try some other approaches to making it work, because I can't give Lisa enough medication to make her want to have that experience. That's not something that most of us would react to positively. So if the person with dementia responds in a way that you or I would respond if we were in the same situation, then giving them medication for it doesn't make sense. So if it's just random, truly out of the blue, not it's been a bad day, it's built, but just spontaneously random trapping you in the corner or going after you, that's when some of those antipsychotic medications work. Now here's the challenge with them. They can have they can have oops, they can have adverse reactions that can be permanent and life threatening. So they can have adverse reactions that can really cause people to have rigidity and stiffness or tremors for the rest of their life. They can cause people to mess up the back of their brain so they can't manage their temperature anymore. They can mess up the way people's pancreas manages insulin, and people are diabetic the rest of their lives. So we have to be really careful about them. So it might be worth risking some of those things if I've got demons, I mean gremlins with blood dripping down their fangs, walking around my ceiling all the time. Might be worth it in that situation. Probably not worth it if I don't want to take a bath. So it's kind of finding that balance for that. So I'm gonna one more group of medicine, then I'm gonna pause for some more questions. The last group of medicines are the anxiety medications. Those are the ones that we tend to give for restlessness and anxiety. Those in the brain, those work in your brain kind of like alcohol, like, you know, a glass of wine or a beer or whatever. They work in your brain that way. So some people who take those medications get really relaxed and take a nap. And the challenge with that is they get relaxed and take a nap. And then when they wake up, they're either hungover or they're ready to go. So people get distressed in the late afternoon. They take one of these medications, they take a nice 3-hour nap, they're up at night, and then we've got a mess. Or they have that paradoxical, that irritated, agitated, more distressed kind of response. So these medications are really hard to work with people living with dementia, especially because their adverse reactions are really hard for older people, because what they're associated with are falls and confusion. And that's really not something else we need to deal with. And so the anxiety medications often are really hard for older people in general to kind of take. So I'm going to look at some of the questions in the thing. Antipsychotics. Antipsychotics. Okay, so should antipsychotics fit in that, or Seroquel, which is the one listed? Seroquel fits in that antipsychotic um, category. And the way those medications work, for the 3 reasons they're supposed to work, is when you first start the medication, what you get are the side effects. And the side effects might be really helpful, because the side effects might be something like making the person relaxed and kind of sleepy. The side effects might be something like making the person really be quiet. So when you start those medications, what you get for the first 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks is the side effect. It takes that long for the chemistry in the brain to really start responding. Now, the antipsychotics work on the neurotransmitters, specifically the dopamine and the norepinephrine. So they work on the neurotransmitters. So they regulate those. They're important. They're good for those. That's why people's hallucinations and delusions and unprovoked violence comes away. So, but it takes about 2 to 3 to 4 weeks for that to start regulating. So until that point, all you're using is the side effects. So the antipsychotics, if we use them in that PRN kind of way, we're kind of exposing people to the adverse reaction potential, because that could be any dose. It's not only the first few doses, it could be any dose. We're exposing them to those possible adverse reactions without really getting the benefits of them. And the benefits of them are stabilizing those neurotransmitters. So using those medications kind of as needed is not really indicated. It's not really recommended. It's not really supported in the research and in the evidence, unless if the person is on a low dose of those medications and sometimes they need more, giving that little extra if it's prescribed, if it's recommended for your person, giving that little extra dose when it's needed, that's appropriate to use. But just using Seroquel, the antipsychotics, kind of as needed, doesn't give you the benefit of the medication that you really need, or really are looking for from that. Let's see. The 3 reasons to use antipsychotics It's hallucinations, delusions, which are those false fixed beliefs, and unprovoked aggression. So those are the three kind of approved reasons for using those medications. Um, the range of Seroquel, I would have to look it up because it's been a while since I've prescribed it. Because different people, I would start at the very lowest adult or children's dose and go as you're recommended to do from there. The problem is everybody's brain is different. Everybody's body breaks down medications differently. So what might work for one person might not be nearly enough for somebody else. What might not, and someone else might need half of a children's dose to get the benefit. Typically people with dementia, the doses that we give them for any of these medications tend to be much smaller. So I might start with a children's dose, a very small dose, and then kind of gradually move up as needed and as directed. But typically, like if I look at the dose that is being used for an adult with bipolar disease or schizophrenia, the dose that that person is going to benefit from is often much higher than the dose of somebody with dementia who's having these hallucinations that really scare them. The other thing that I would mention about those antipsychotics is that you often only need them for a little while. So you often only need them for like 3 months because dementia is progressive. So often what happens is you need them for a period. And when you need them, you really need them. This person has hallucinations, blood and fangs and all that kind of stuff. So they need them there. But what I'm going to do is with the recommendation of the pharmacist, the physician, nurse practitioner, PA, I'm going to try to see, do they still need that much or can we taper it down a little bit? Do they still need that much or can I use a little bit less frequently? So I'm going to try this, or do they need it at all because their brain has changed enough that they don't need it at all anymore? So another question is, how long should when someone take the dementia? So I usually encourage the families that I worked with to give it a year, because if I try to compare week to week, day to day, month to month, I can't, it's really hard. But if the person's on the medication for a year and we say, so what could, and I don't get any money from any of these drugs, so I'm not getting any kickback. So no benefit to me if they sell more of them. So then we look back and we say, so how was mom last Easter? How is she this Easter? And if she's about the same, then we're thinking we're doing well. If it's really obvious that she's not doing things this Easter she could do last Easter, then I'm going to look at it and say probably not a big benefit for this person. The next is there's one about the B vitamin kinds of things. There were some B vitamin kinds of things.
Would you require some labs with them psychotropic medications? Would you
I'm sorry.
recommend?
I heard something about labs with antipsychotic medication.
Would you recommend labs for certain psychotropic medications?
Yeah, most of the pharmacists and physicians will recommend labs because those things are metabolized through the liver, and so they kind of like to monitor those. The question, yes, I heard somebody else.
Melanie, the question about the B vitamin supplements, I think,
Yeah.
it says, are you familiar with serifluin and Deplin, two supplements that are very similar, one to enhance antidepressants, the other for enhancing memory meds?
And I'm trying to remember if I think those are the B vitamin kinds of things, but I'm not really sure. I'd have to go and look at those. It's been a while since I've dug into those and read about those. For most of those supplement kinds of things, there rarely is anything dangerous or wrong about them. Sometimes some people they work for, sometimes some people don't get as much response from them. So Lee, if you want to email me individually, I'll do some thinking and get back with you. So you can email Lisa and she'll get back with me. And then there's one about 10 milligrams of Namenda and Aricept. Does changing the dosage make a difference? Well, it's kind of looking at what dosage does your person tolerate, and then different things work for different people. So I might have that conversation on your next appointment. There are some different dosages, different preparations that kind of go up in dose. And sometimes people are willing to give those a try, and sometimes people don't. We're okay where we are, let's just leave it where we are. So I want to thank you all for coming in. Lisa's going to give you her email. You can send her some questions or you can respond back to the Zoom. Take what I've said as general and generic and not as specific recommendations for anybody, unless you want to invite me to your house to hang out, but I can't do that anyway. But thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for your questions, for working with me on the brain things. And if I can help you with anything, just reach out.